Councilman-At-Large. I'm here with Ward E Councilman James Solomon, and this is the fourth of our series of interviews with prospective Ward D candidates, and today we have Jocelyn Patrick. Hi, welcome, Jocelyn.
Hi, how are you, Councilman Navarro? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So I'm just going to, we're going to ask you a series of questions that we sent to you in advance. We have about 30 minutes in total for all of the questions. And we may ask some follow-up questions as we go along through the process. And then at the very end, there may be one or two questions from us, or one each that relates specifically to you as opposed to the prepared questions that we gave you. Ready to get started?
Whenever you're ready, gentlemen.
All right. Councilman Solomon is going to kick us off then.
Sure. The first question is three parts, so I'll go through each part one by one. But the first is just a simple, why are you interested in the position?
The simple matter of the fact is I'm interested in the position as a temporary stopgap until the election can take place in November. I'm a big believer in the democratic process, and while it is absolutely tragic, the way in which we lost Councilman Yun, I think that picking anyone for this position who is going to be running in November puts them at an unfair advantage. You know, Councilman Yun would have been the incumbent, then he would have run against all challengers. I think in order to level the playing field, everyone should be equal who's running in November. So my proposition is simply to fill the role and to carry on his mission for the next 7 months. And in November, people can elect whoever they want to elect.
Thank you. So the second question related to that is what, please describe what education, training, or experience you have that is relevant and makes you qualified to serve as the council person. And then specifically, do you have any training in public administration, urban planning, or municipal finance?
I've been involved with our local neighborhood association since I moved to the Heights in 2012. I joined in 2013. I served as secretary until September, October, I think August or September of last year when I took over as president, and then I was elected again as president in January of this year. So I've worked a lot with the neighborhood associations. I've met with, council people. I've met with people from DPW. I've met with lots of different elected officials. So it's not as if it's new territory for me. As far as specific training, other than budgeting for both nonprofits and for a for-profit company, I don't have any municipal or public. I have never held a public office or anything like that.
Great.
And it's I'm sorry.
No, you can continue.
No, I was just, because I know the list of questions and I was starting to answer the next question. But
That's all right. So you sort of answered this question already.
Yes, I did.
About the November election, but maybe I can ask it in a slightly different way, which is slightly more personal to you, which is, can you just elaborate a little bit more on your sort of choice here to put your hat in the ring, but also to not stand for a potential election in November?
I've been asked that question a lot. And I think what's surprising about the question is that we've come to look at politics as being something that people go into forever or for a living or until the cows come home. And the idea that someone would want to do something on a temporary basis with the goal being the election should be equal is what people can't seem to wrap their minds around. I think we're very much used to kind of picking people or having people picked for us, so that the idea that someone wants to do something simply because the election needs to be fair is what people have a hard time wrapping their minds around. I mean, my husband was like, "Are you nuts? Why would you want to do it for 7 months?" I said, just for that. I mean, there's no agenda, there's nothing behind it. I wouldn't change my mind in November and go, I'm going to run. I want everybody to have an equal chance. I don't want it to be someone is favorited. That's part of the democratic process that I feel very strongly about, that if you're going to compete, everybody should be on the same level. Unless you're the incumbent, then you've had 4 years to prove whether you should be reelected.
Got it. Great. Rolando, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted because my daughter is doing piano lessons in the background.
No problem.
So I have the second question, and as you know, as we know, Councilman Yun was known for his analytical questions and his willingness to take on the politically powerful, including his own council colleagues. So how specifically will you follow that example? And how would you approach the role differently than Councilman Wood?
I mean, one of the things that people who know me and people who've worked with me know is that I ask questions. Questions are the things that I think are important when you're trying to make decisions. I think you need to look at detail, you need to ask, and sometimes you have to ask questions that make people uncomfortable because then you get the answers that you're looking for. That's something that I think, Councilman Young and I probably did have in common, is that both of us were very much, about analyzing things and not necessarily taking things at their word. So in that respect, we're very similar. In terms of approaching the role differently, yeah, people are different just by their nature. So I can't sit here and say there's something specifically that I would do differently. I just believe that the facts kind of weigh out over everything. So therefore, if the facts say I need to go left and the direction is right, then I'm going to fight to go left because that's where the facts say I need to go.
Great. Thank you, Jocelyn. So the next question is, what are the most difficult challenges facing the Heights today?
You see, after parking my car, I mean, no matter who you talk to in the Heights, the first thing out of their mouths is parking. There's been an increase in density, there's all this new construction, and, the way the rules are in the city in terms of 0.75 spaces for every apartment. I've never seen 0.75 car in my entire life. So, parking is the thing that's always on people's minds. There's a parking study being done. There are alternatives. There are things we haven't looked at. I mean, I know now they're using the schools as parking. I don't know if that's a permanent solution, but parking is definitely, I think the #1 issue in terms of the Heights. As far as, if you're looking at a second issue, it's probably development, because you've got, developers who want to increase density. You want people who want affordable housing. You got landowners who want to get higher rents. So, balancing those three things, absolutely. You're going to get three different sides of that same coin, all about the same, area. So I would think those are the two, parking being first and the push-pull and development being second.
Okay. This is kind of a follow-up to the idea of challenges, but what would be your top 3 legislative priorities? And knowing that you've got a shorter timeline since you'll be working through November, what are you going to do right out of the gate there?
I mean, a lot of what I would be working on would be continuing things that, Councilman Young had already put in place. He was working on something to remove the penalties for property taxes, because we know that a lot of people aren't going to be able to pay their property taxes because they're out of work. There was some reform he was working on regarding nepotism in City Hall as far as hiring goes. There was a big ordinance that he just recently got passed regarding security in senior residences. So a lot of it, what I would be doing is working to continue what he had started, to make sure that those things got through, to make sure that they were moved forward so that they'd be in a good position to either get done or to be handed off to whoever would follow me.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So you touched on this next question already, but maybe get a chance to elaborate, and we could have a couple follow-ups on it, which is, in your time as council person, what would you do to address the parking issues in the Heights and in Jersey City as a whole?
I mean, I know there's a parking study that's being done. I'm not sure of the timeline as to when it's going to be completed. I think I did see something come through my email regarding a virtual meeting. I
Yeah,
think it came through earlier today.
interrupt you. This hasn't been, I think, made public, although I think it was sent out today, so it's hot off the presses. But
Okay.
the team that did the parking study is going to present to the city council on Monday.
Ah,
So
okay.
during our virtual caucus meeting. So literally, we
Okay.
sent out an hour ago.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of the parking study, once the results of the parking study are actually released, then you can start looking at what experts say need to be done, and then overlay that with what people who actually live here have to deal with. Because sometimes experts look at things from a bigger picture than the day-to-day kind of living in the Heights. There are things that can be done with streets that are perhaps maybe that are two-way that could be made one-way, and then maybe look at angled parking. I know there are areas of the city where angled parking has been put into play on streets that probably shouldn't be two-way. I can think of one in particular between Bowers, which is where I live, and Kennedy Boulevard. and that street is two-way, but if you've ever driven up and down that street, it probably should be one-way, which would free up one side or the other for angle parking and therefore increase parking. So taking into account what the city study says and then looking at the practicality of things, that would be one of the things that I'd be looking at.
Great. And as a quick follow-up, an idea that's certainly been talked about since 2017, but before that as well, is the creation of a parking garage on or along Central Avenue. Is that something an idea that you has merit, and how would you approach that?
Garages come with inherent difficulties. You've got to police them. You've got to make sure that there's 24-hour security, because when you put a lot of cars on a lot of floors in space of time, unfortunately you invite crime. They have to be well lit. They have to be monitored. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I'm not sure it's the best idea. I think it's just the easiest idea. People think you put a bunch of cars in space and that works. That's not necessarily the perfect or not even the best solution. Sometimes I think it's just the way people's minds kind of go. If you build a parking garage, we can park more cars, as opposed to looking at things like maybe changing the direction of streets, putting in angled parking, looking at using the schools. There's a lot of things that I think people don't sometimes think about.
Great, thank you.
Okay, on the sixth question here, again, you touched on that when you talked about some of the challenges with development. Can you tell us what your position is on inclusionary zoning, and should there be any changes made to our rent control legislation?
Well, see, that's two questions, right? That's actually, you're sneaking in a second question, even though it's all one question. It's actually two separate questions. So, as far as inclusionary zoning, I think there really needs to be a mix of AMI. I don't think you can blanketly just say all of Jersey City is X. I think you have to look at AMI from a broader scale and then apply it based upon where in the city you are. 60% of something in the Heights is very different from 60% of something downtown, which is different from 60% of something in Greenville. So I think there needs to be an overarching framework, and then you have to look, whether you have to dig in on a ward by ward basis or use census data and go block by block. I think the AMI is where you start, and then you look at adjusting how Jersey City uses the AMI based on the area that you're in order to make those numbers work for everyone. And the sneaky part of your two-part question about changes to rent control. Rent control is tough. And the reason I say that is because how do you tell a homeowner who can possibly get $2,000 a month that they should only take $600? And how do you tell the person who can only pay $600 that they need to pay $2,000? I think there is compromise in there somewhere, but I think it requires a lot of conversation, because sometimes the same people who have to live with rent control because that's all they can afford to pay are also the same people who might, or people who live in areas where the homeowners are using the money from the rent to, not supplement their yacht, but maybe sometimes just supplementing their day-to-day living. And, as areas change, whether we accept that or not, if people can afford to pay more, how do you tell someone to accept less? So there has to be some kind of compromise that doesn't force people out who can afford to pay more, but doesn't necessarily penalize a homeowner from maybe making a little bit more money. It's a complicated conversation.
Councilman Solomon?
Sorry, just unmuting. So thank you, Jocelyn. So next question gets into our schools, and it's also a two-parter. So it's
another sneaky one. I know.
Get both of them in. So the first question, part one, is what is your position on the upcoming school board referendum about governance between mayoral control and elected school board? And the second part of that question is, in putting yourself in the position of the school board, how would you think about the current school budget crisis?
Okay. All right. So as far as the referendum regarding the school board, I never think it's a good idea to take away people's power to vote for people. I think that while there may be justification for doing it in some minds, I think that if people are allowed to elect the people who represent them, that really should not ever be a bad thing. So I don't think you need to do that. I think the public needs to be able to select the people that are on the school board. I think if you have an issue with people that are on the school board, one of the options might be to move the school board elections back to April, because that was before the school budget, so that if the school board did something that you didn't like, you can vote them out before the budget's approved. If they, if you're happy with them, then you leave them in there. I think if you have the election in November, where they're there until the next term, you're kind of stuck with it. You don't have any voice into what happens in the budget. So I think if the issue is how they're handling the budget, then move the election to before the budgets are voted on, and then you can have your say because you'll know how people are going to vote. That's kind of how I look at that. How would I address the current school budget crisis? Probably going to get dinged for this, but if you voted for these people and we put them on this board, then let them do their job. Why is the city, which is already stretched in trying to do city work, interfering with what the Board of Education is doing? The people have said these are their representatives. Let them do their job. If they need our help, they can ask for it. If they make bad decisions, then they can be voted out of office. I don't think we really need to interfere directly in what they do.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Next two questions have to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what can the city do to help residents and small businesses survive and recover from the economic fallout from the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, let's see, in 120 seconds, what can I possibly say? I mean, the first thing that I think of is something that, once again, Councilman Young was working on, and that was the penalties for late fees for property taxes. I think that's something that it doesn't cost the city anything, because that's money the lien holders would be making when they buy the liens from the city for people that don't pay their property taxes. I also think that there is a discrepancy in the interest rate that's being charged for those late fees or those late property taxes that's not necessarily in line with current interest rates. And this is something that could have been fixed, long before COVID. But, if the current interest rate on your house is, 3%, 3.5%, your late penalty shouldn't be 18% or 19%. That's something that you can tie to something like the prime rate, so that it's always fair, and it gives the homeowner a chance to actually get out from under, late fees. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be paying their property taxes late, and if they're being charged 18, 20% interest, how do you ever climb out from under that? So let it be tied to something like the prime interest. It will fluctuate. So if interest rates are high, it'll be high. If interest rates are low, it'll be low. But at least then the homeowner has a chance to kind of climb their way out of the debt that they've unfortunately been, placed in through no fault of their own. So that's my suggestion for that.
And that makes sense. Any follow-up on the small businesses? I know, again, short time.
Well, I think small businesses are going to be suffering from the same thing, because they're going to have owners of their properties who are going to request, are going to push pressure on them because they're going to have to pay this interest. So I think if you take the pressure off of the homeowners and the property owners and the people who own the businesses the small businesses are in, then they can more easily work out repayment arrangements, because they don't have the specter of this interest payment on top of everything else that puts pressure on them. So I think if you relieve the pressure to the people that actually own the places that the small businesses are leasing from, you should be able to then come up to some kind of a compromise for how we repay, what we're trying to repay, so that everybody at least has a feeling like they're getting something out of the deal.
Great, thank you. So moving to the last question, which is, how would you prioritize the city's budget during the COVID-19 crisis? Mayor Fulop has projected that we may have a $70 million shortfall in combination of lost revenue and extra costs. So what areas would you prioritize, and where would you look for cuts?
Oh boy, this is a double-edged sword. And the reason it's a double-edged sword, because at the end of the day, I don't think the city's going to be able to come up with a way to make up the shortfall. I think the city's going to have to advocate to both state and federal representatives, whether it's Cory Booker, whether it's Brian Stack, whether it's Raj Mukherjee, to advocate strongly for money both from the state and the federal level. I think it's unreasonable to expect that even if budgets were cut, and things were, to the absolute nth penny, that you can just climb your way out of a $60+ million hole. So I think, yes, we have to look for opportunities to save. I do not advocate laying people off or furloughing people. I know that sometimes with businesses, that's the first place you look. But, there's going to be a lot of people who are already out of work. I don't necessarily think adding to that is going to help. But I think, you have to look at where the money is being spent, how it's being spent, what you can delay, and then you have to strongly advocate on the state and the federal level to help with these, because the city, I just don't believe the city can do it on its own.
Okay.
Can I ask one follow up on that?
Sure.
There's a few folks. So what you said makes a ton of sense. How do you think about, if the aid doesn't come in to close that gap, or it only closes a portion of the gap, how do you think about choices between sort of, cuts that may have to come to important services, or raising property taxes? Just, obviously you can't answer without knowing the specifics, but just give a sense of how you would think about that decision, as it may come in the coming months for the city.
I think, property taxes, raising property taxes are always the thing no one ever wants to do. And I think that, and this is very much off script, as you would like to say in this business, but I've always felt if people understand that you're spending their money appropriately and that it's not being wasted, and they can actually see that they're getting the services that they're paying for, the property tax argument isn't hard to make because you feel like you're getting something. I think it becomes much harder to make that argument when people look out their windows and things that they're already paying for aren't done. When their streets are dirty, when, buildings are empty, when you can't get, things done, you can't get things responded to, the idea of throwing good money after bad never works for people. So I think, the city has to really go out of its way to prove that it's using the money we're already giving it in the best way possible, in the most efficient way possible, and getting the best services possible before you start looking at asking people for more money.
Great, thanks.
I'm going to have, it's a follow-up, but it's actually my individual question here that I'm going to ask Jocelyn. So if you're elected, if you're appointed rather, you'll be sworn in this Thursday, probably immediately after the election, I would assume. I'm sorry, after the council meeting, which will be a special meeting on Thursday, April 30th. Then you'll be in the first council meeting on May 6th. And that May 6th council meeting, we're likely taking up, and the mayor's announced that he's looking to withdraw the referendum, rescind the referendum on the arts tax fund, as well as the open space trust fund. And not the referendum, but in place of the open space trust fund, looking to cancel the tax altogether and the funding allocations that come from there. Can you tell us your thoughts on that issue? You're thrown right into the...
I think it's a little unfair to remove not even so much things that people have worked very hard on, but I think that we undervalue things like arts and open spaces. This is an urban environment. There are people who don't have access to open spaces. There are people who, live in very small spaces or live in areas where, you see concrete more than you've seen grass. So I think, we have to think about quality of life as well as, what things are going to cost. And that's where I think going back and looking at the budget before you make those kinds of decisions is incredibly important. They worked for 2 years to get a penny. Now, a penny to somebody who makes, I don't know, $80,000 a year versus a penny to somebody who's living off of a Social Security tax, huge difference. But the value of that penny may actually be the same to both. So I think it needs, before you pull these things away that seem like, well, we can always get back to them, you really have to look at them in reference to the other things that might be available. I just think it's too easy sometimes to say, you know what, don't worry about the parks. You know what, don't worry about arts. But arts are what get you through pandemics. The music online, the pictures people post, the children that are coloring and playing and arts, that all matters to people's mental health as much as anything else. So I'd probably look at it a little differently.
Great, thank you. And so, Jocelyn, my personal question for your candidacy here is someone in the Western Slope or another part of the Heights might express some view that said, hey, the issues that the RNA focuses on are different than the issues that matter in my section of the Heights.
Mm-hmm.
And so how would you speak to someone who might have some skepticism on Western Slope or some of the other parts of the Heights about how you would be able to sort of listen and address their concerns in addition to concerns coming from Riverview area?
I mean, the first thing that I would say to anyone that would think that I've lived in Jersey City since 1991. I lived in Greenville longer than I've lived in the Heights. I just moved to the Heights in 2012. And, I've learned a lot about the Heights, but I know a lot about Greenville. I know a lot about, and at the end of the day, if you talk to someone, if you walk their streets, if you, go to their neighborhood association meetings, you can get a sense of what's important so that people will feel like it's not just about Riverview. It's not just about Palisade or Central. There's Kennedy, there are other streets. There's, Leonard Gordon Park. There's other things in the Heights. So it's not just, that I may have started as Riverview, but that does not mean I'm not for the Heights. That just means that's where I started, and everybody has to start somewhere.
Great, thank you. So the last, you did a great job on time, which I'm appreciative of. So the last just moment is just for you to get a chance, I know, to summarize and just say, again, speaking to the public watching this, why did you put your hat in the ring, and why are you the best choice for this time?
Hopefully if you managed to sit through this entire 33 minutes and I haven't spoken so fast that you didn't really understand what I was saying, you'll understand that the reason that I'm here is simply for equity. The reason that I'm doing this is, I want to carry on the things that Councilman Young was working on, but I also am a huge believer in the democratic process. And the democratic process says that you should have the right to vote for the person who represents you. You should not have to kind of settle for something that someone else has chosen. So that's the only reason that I'm here. I can promise you that I'm not going to change my mind and in November go, well, I'm having such a good time, I'll stay. If I want to do that, then that's something that maybe I could look at for 2021. But once again, there is an elected process for 2021. All I want to do is make the November process fair so that everybody has an equal chance and no one has an advantage over anyone else. That's my entire agenda, if you want to call it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for the time and for putting yourself out there to take this position. And we hope you and family stay safe. And
you do the same. Thank you for creating something that will live on the internet forever. So when I'm 90 and I'm at a party, somebody will go, remember when you did this? So thank you, gentlemen, very much for that. I do appreciate your time and I appreciate your listening. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Stay safe. Be well.